Well, as we've mentioned, Top General Mark Milley is apologizing and says he regrets participating in a recent photo op with President Trump at a historic church. Earlier this month, federal police used chemical agents to clear peaceful protesters near the White House as the president was escorted to St. John's Episcopal Church. He held up a Bible for 10 minutes and took photos. The move was met by criticism from many religious leaders. One person who has spoken out is the Reverend Dr. Barber. He's the author of the book, We Are Called to Be a Movement, a challenge to bring change by coming together. He also leads the Poor People's Campaign, and he's also the co-chair of the Poor People's Campaign and the president of the organization Repairers of the Breach. He joins me now. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you.
You recently you co-wrote an op-ed in the Washington Post about the president's photo op, calling his use of the Bible obscene. Why were you so offended by that?
Thank you so much. I actually wrote that op-ed with a dear friend of mine, Reverend Jonathan Hartgrove, who used to be a part of white evangelicalism and has since left it because he recognized that the focus was more about race than it was about the religion of Jesus Christ. What was so offensive and should be offensive to all people in this country is, first of all, the president using the military, using tear gas on nonviolent protesters. That harkens back to the days of George Wallace and Bull Connor. And then for him to argue that he is promoting law and order, again, that harkens back to Bull Connor and George Wallace, who said they were about law and order. Then he goes over to the church. He does not pray. He does not repent. He does not commit himself to the way of Jesus Christ, which is love and truth and taking care of the poor, the least of these, the hungry, the sick, and the immigrant. He does not commit himself to the ways of the prophets, commit himself to justice. Instead, he poses. That was a heretical form of public idolatry and narcissism. And to do that should be not only offensive, it should be deeply concerning, because there are other ministers around the country that actually endorsed him doing that, said it was okay. But remember, there were people who used the Bible to endorse slavery. There were people who used the Bible to endorse women not having the right to vote. There are people who used the Bible to endorse the genocide of Native people, and people who used the Bible to endorse Jim Crow. This president was highly out of order with the church and the ways of Jesus Christ.
The House, as you know, held a hearing today on COVID-19 and its impact on voting rights, and we've seen the virus's disproportionate impact on Black and brown communities. Are you concerned about people being able to safely vote?
Deeply concerned. First of all, before we ever had COVID-19, we had many legislatures, particularly in the South, engaged in racist voter suppression. The courts have called it surgical racism. I come from a state. We had a 6-year battle against surgical racism and through voting. We also know that ever since 2013, June 25th, 2013, 2,544 days ago, McConnell and Republicans have blocked fixing the Voting Rights Act. We know that states were already trying to suppress the vote. We know that Trump won Wisconsin in 2016 by 30,000 votes, but we know 250,000 votes were suppressed according to a book entitled Give Us the Ballot. So now in the midst of COVID, people having to risk their lives to exercise their right to vote. When we could change that is unjust. It is a violation of the 15th Amendment, a violation of equal protection under the law, and we should be deeply concerned. We see what happened in Georgia just the other day and Nevada. We see what happened earlier in other states. This should be concerning for us, and for Republicans not to be willing to join with Democrats and fix this problem means that they are just as much to blame as Trump. They're engaging in just as much racism as Trump, because voter suppression is about racism. It's targeted at Black people, but voter suppression undermines our democracy. And voter suppression also has what I call a DM, a death measurement. Because when people get elected through voter suppression, most of the time the people that get elected that way, they're against health care, they're against living wages. And when you deny health care and deny living wages, you actually cost people their lives.
I want to look ahead to June 20th. That is when you are hosting the Mass Poor People's Assembly and National Moral March on Washington. Now, the virtual event will focus on issues like police misconduct, poverty, and the coronavirus. How will a virtual march work, and what are you hoping to accomplish?
Well, actually, we had planned to have a mass Poor People's Assembly moral march on Washington in person on Pennsylvania Avenue, and then the coronavirus hit. Our focus is really on systemic racism and all of its forms: systemic poverty, ecological devastation, the war economy, and the false moral narrative, religious nationalism. We are building a moral fusion coalition: black, white, brown, red, yellow, people of faith, people not of faith, gay, straight, Jews, Muslims, Christians, all people coming together saying there are 5 interlocking injustices we have to address: systemic racism, systemic poverty, and we're showing this country that, for instance, there are 140 million poor and low wealth people in this country. That's 43% of this nation. 700 people die every day from poverty, 250,000 people a year. On June 20th, we sent out 50 million invites for America and around the world to come, not to hear me, but to hear white coal miners from Kentucky and white farmers from Kansas that are suffering through poverty, along with black people from Mississippi and Alabama who will give their stories, who will tell their pain before COVID, during COVID, but will also offer up an agenda, because we must turn the marching in the street to a mandate for an agenda. They will lay out a budget and they will declare that America has to address these 5 interlocking injustices. We have people like David Oyelowo, who played Martin Luther King in Selma, Erica Alexander, who used to play on Living Single, Vice President Gore, Jane Fonda, but they're not coming to speak. They are coming to introduce poor and low wealth people of every race, creed, and color who will tell their stories, make their demands, and say, we are going to lift our voices, show our faces, and we're building power, registering people to vote. Because we've done a study that shows if you register 15% of poor and low wealth people of every race, creed, and color around an agenda, they can fundamentally shift the politics in this country.
You're also giving a sermon this Sunday at the Washington National Cathedral, and the focus of your address will be about healing the nation. With all of the challenges facing our country today, how do we move toward and achieve that goal?
Well, the first thing is we have to face it. I think the hope is actually in the mourning we see in the street, that people are saying, listen, we can't continue this way. And not just around police violence. That's one part of racism. That's one part of the injustice. But denying health care causes death. Denying a living wages causes death. Poverty causes death. Ecological devastation causes death. Putting more money in the war economy than we do in helping lift up infrastructure and education and health care creates death. And so we have to face it. Secondly, we have to say it's not just Trump. We can't blame it all on him. He certainly is the tip of the spear, but anybody who has sat quietly, been calm, agreed with him, promoted his policies are just as guilty as he is. And then we must have the what I call the rejected, all of those who've been hurt by injustice and negative power. It's more of us than there are those doing it, and we must come together. But on Sunday, and I thank the Episcopal Bishop for allowing me to come to the National Cathedral, I'm going to preach America, accepting death is not an option anymore. We're going to have to put what I call a DM measurement, a death measurement, on every piece of public policy. And look at those public policy in terms not of Democrat, Republican, and left versus right, but life versus death. Life is the first declaration of this democracy: life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And if a bill or a policy causes death, if it causes death in disproportionate ways to anyone, then it is contrary to our deepest religious values and our deepest constitutional values. In fact, I would say it is morally indefensible, constitutionally inconsistent, and economically insane. And so what we're saying, I'm saying we have to deal with death. We'll talk about not in all of its form and declare life. What does life look like? Raise the living wage to $15 an hour, and 39 million of the 62 million people who make less than a living wage will come out of poverty. Provide health care for everyone. A health economy is a more a robust economy, provide life, provide the kind of voting rights we need, and we can elect people who will promote progressive policies and not regressive policy. America has a decision. Will we choose life or will we choose death? And the mourning in the street is actually the hope, because the mourning and the crying and the protest is telling us what we need to do and that the time to do it is right now.
Reverend Dr. William Barber, thank you very much for taking the time to talk to us. Really appreciate it.
God bless you, and thank you so much.